Okay, here is unit number 2, question number 2. And in this one, you're given a model diagram of a plasma membrane. And part A says, describe the biological need for cells to be surrounded by a membrane that is selectively permeable for different materials. Well, clearly, one need that structure meets is the need to keep an internal environment homeostatic, or you could say keep the conditions inside the cell different from the conditions outside the cell. Those are ways you could describe that. You could also say the selective permeability allows for a cell to keep different concentration gradients for different molecules established across that membrane. That's basically it there. Let's see, what is part B? Part B says explain how the model shows selective permeability of the membrane to specific ions. Well, basically what it's showing is that the polar molecules, and how do we know that those are polar molecules? We know that those are polar molecules because it says there's water soluble, right? So we know water is a highly polar molecule, and if a molecule is soluble, able to be dissolved in water, that molecule itself is polar. So we know that these molecules here are polar. And then these ones that are colored in black, we know those are nonpolar because they're lipid soluble. That seems like a funny way to describe that to me, but that's telling us that these ones are nonpolar, these ones are polar. Okay, and so the question says, explain how the model shows selective permeability, meaning some things can pass and some things can't, to specific ions. Well, in this case, it's showing us that the nonpolar ones, as long as they're small enough, can wiggle through the phospholipid bilayer, that's what it's showing us here. And it's showing us that these polar molecules, right, regardless of size, generally speaking, cannot wiggle through the phospholipid bilayer. Instead, they need some sort of transport protein, and in this case, it looks like there's a channel protein, a membrane channel, that is there specifically to allow the diffusion of polar molecules through the membrane. So selective permeability, it's showing because some, in that phrase, selective permeability means some molecules shall pass, some molecules shall not pass. So it's showing us that the small polar ones, small nonpolar ones can pass through there, whereas these polar molecules cannot pass through the phospholipid bilayer, but need a carrier protein, or a transport protein to move from one side of the membrane to the other. Okay, C. Describe the characteristics of the phospholipid bilayer that permit small hydrophobic lipid molecules to pass directly across the membrane. The characteristic is that the inside of it is nonpolar. That's the answer. And that therefore they can pass through the membrane as long as they're small enough. That's a pretty simple, straightforward answer. D, based on the model, explain whether the molecules shown crossing the membrane require energy to do so. Well, energy is required if molecules are moving against the concentration gradient from low to high, and in this case, that is not happening for either one of these sets of molecules. They are both moving from high concentration to low concentration, which therefore tells us what? They do not require energy to do so. Passive transport via diffusion. Okay, that's it for this one.